In 2019, France watched a national treasure go up in flames. Now, there's a fear that the structures holding up French politics are starting to catch.
There is clearly a problem with French public finances.
Further worsening of the budget deficit.
France's political crisis deepened today.
Most French citizens adore their nation's system of social safety nets, but those programs have become increasingly unsustainable. France has the euro area's largest deficit, massive debt, and every attempt at reform has ended the same way.
Surprise resignation from the Prime Minister.
4 prime ministers in 20 months.
We're heading into our 5th Prime Minister now in 2 years.
French politics is in a bit of a mess. It really is an unprecedented crisis.
Benefit reform sparks this, unions break out the flares, and fragile coalitions collapse under the strain.
France is currently characterized by political blockage due to a very difficult public finance situation.
What people talk about is sort of a gradual sort of suffocation of France's ability to deal with its fundamental economic problems.
History suggests that at this point it's more likely that only a shock can force change. The question is what or who would deliver it? The French government has a long history of running up debt.
Last year, France paid about 60 billion euros in interest alone, which is about equivalent to its defence spending.
We're on course for 100 billion a year in debt servicing costs by the end of this decade.
We live in a world where all countries are taking on debt post-COVID, but I think France is definitely a concerning standout.
You can see just how grave the debt burden is by comparing it to Germany's over the last 20 years.
What you see is that they're more or less at the same level until the global financial crisis. And then both their debt burdens start to increase, but France's increases further. And then you get to the Eurozone debt crisis, and while Germany manages to correct after the crisis, France's debt burden just keeps ticking up. And that has sort of happened again in COVID.
And actually, it's likely to continue to increase in the future. If nothing is done, it can only increase. There were some forecasts that said that the debt to GDP ratio will reach 125%, but other forecasts are pointing to 150% in 2035.
Meanwhile, those tens of billions of euros in interest payments must continue. That's money that can't be spent on what the public expects.
France is characterized by a very high level of public spending, around 57% of GDP.
The euro area is closer to 50%, Germany is below that, the UK is below that, the US is closer to 40%. One of the key challenges to that is the sort of almost sacred role of the social security system in France. This idea that the French state is responsible for ensuring equality and solidarity, fraternity between citizens in education, in health, unemployment insurance and pensions.
So protecting the people and protecting mostly the oldest people in the country. So 60% of those public spending is going to the oldest people in the country.
Pensions are one of the main reasons France's debt keeps rising and markets keep sweating.
What might be a private pension system in other countries runs through the balance sheet of the French state.
For a lot of people, it can go above 3,000 euros a month, so it is much higher than the wage on average. So it's very important for public opinion. They are very protective about this.
Protests erupted across France in 2023 when the government raised the retirement age from 62 to 64.
More than 500,000 people marched across France.
Macron and the government are attacking one of the central rights of the working class.
As the society gets older and as the working population relative to people out of work shrinks, it basically costs a lot more to keep that coverage going.
So now France has rising debt, swelling pension bills, fewer workers and shrinking tax revenue. In finance, this is what's technically known as not ideal. Now, in a perfect world, you'd fix this with a mix of higher taxes, lower benefits, or short-term borrowing until growth catches up. But, and sorry if this comes as a depressing surprise, we don't live in a perfect world.
We know also that from innovation point of view, Europe is really much struggling to catch up.
So for now, France keeps borrowing. But lenders usually shy away from heavily indebted, politically gridlocked countries. And because about 60% of French debt is held abroad, France is especially exposed to swings of investor sentiment.
I think you can see from, for example, credit downgrades recently, a lot of concern from rating agencies and debt investors to the direction of travel of French public finances.
Now that has a kind of a feedback loop, because as bond investors lose confidence, they tend to sell the bonds, and that drives up the borrowing costs for France.
It shows up clearly in the French-German spread, the premium France pays to borrow compared with Germany, the Eurozone's benchmark.
So they're borrowing around 2.7%, France is around 3.5%. So that difference is 0.8 percentage points, or 80 basis points. That is the measure of the spread. So why does that matter? The spread is this sort of extra cost for the French state to finance itself. But it's important also because that has a ripple effect through the economy. It has a big bearing on mortgages, on consumer loans, on loans that businesses need to invest. And so the spread is the price that the whole French economy pays for the political instability, for the uncertainty.
So, a large number of French voters won't accept reduced benefits, but the state can't afford them, and borrowing costs are therefore on a tear. Why is this so hard to fix?
France has been in uncharacteristic political instability since the snap elections in 2024.
You need to understand two things. France has a president, that's this chap, but it also has something of a problematic addiction to switching prime ministers.
I think we are at the fourth point, or fifth one.
It's hard to keep count, actually.
So Edouard Philippe, Elisabeth Borne.
She was then replaced by Gabriel Attal.
Barnier.
Barnier was brought down in a no-confidence vote.
Then Bayrou.
That's 4.
And no Sébastien Lecornu.
In fact, Sébastien Lecornu has resigned and then been reappointed. So in some respects, we've had 6 prime ministers that have tried to reckon with this very unstable political situation.
That is leading to a stuck parliament that cannot find agreements and that cannot make reforms that are needed in order to solve the very big issue of the public finance situation.
Because everybody has their eye on the next presidential election, nobody wants to be seen to be pushing through unpopular measures for a budget.
Things like Exhibit A.
You still have 2/3 of the French opposed to the pension reform.
So that's why we just keep getting this instability. It's because France needs a budget, but France can't actually get one together.
The political stalemate is also preventing Eurozone unity in the face of outside challenges.
Europe is in a situation where it needs to go toe-to-toe with China and the US.
The world needs a credible and strong Europe. And you can't have a credible and strong Europe without a credible and strong France. France, along with Germany, really is the core of the euro. Together, they make up half of the euro area's GDP. France also is the biggest food producer in the EU. It has the biggest army, and it has nuclear weapons.
Many experts say only the 2027 presidential race can break the impasse. But that too is a source of anxiety for markets and world leaders.
We know that in 2027, Macron is gone. So who will replace him?
All parties are thinking about the presidential election. They are all positioning themselves for the campaign.
The far right is potentially on track to win the next election, whether it's parliamentary, but especially presidential. That could really pressure the euro area.
I mean, you look at the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party has done it very well in recent legislative elections.
Both the far left and the far right are proposing a lot more spending, and they both would double down on the current problems without really tackling them. I think that it would be quite a challenge for European partners and the euro if you had France go in this direction.
So, is there any optimism to be found while we wait?
To be fair to Macron, he has had a lot of success in pushing through what we call structural reforms to make it easier to invest or easier to hire, more flexibility in the labour force.
And amid the gloom, Notre Dame endures, a reminder that France can find unity when it needs it most.
The restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral is really one of the few good news stories that's come out of France. Macron made a promise that in 5 years' time the cathedral will be reopened and restored. And he kept that promise. I think down to a few reasons that might apply to the current crisis facing France. The first is Macron set a deadline and stuck to it. That takes leadership. Secondly, in all of French society, right up to the ultra-rich, gave money to help fund the restoration. And finally, there was a real willingness to think outside of the box. Not every onerous building regulation was followed. There was a lot of creativity and a lot of seriousness, and I think that that could help a political crisis like this one.